Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this video is a video on EJS applied to Express, because you can use templating engines in really any backend framework. So all the JavaScript templating engines can be used in Koa, they can be used in Express, they can be used wherever you want, but I'm going to specifically talk about Express. So Express is the web framework, the thing that allows us to create a server and make routes. And EJS is the templating engine. Essentially, it's going to be the engine that's going to allow us to dynamically create HTML files. That's essentially what it does. A templating engine is going to allow us to create like a template of an HTML file with with coding logic, with variables and placeholders. And what it does, it's going to take data that we give it at render time, and it will take that data, inject it into the template, and create a final HTML file that it sends out. That's what EJS does. That's what all templating engines do. And there's a lot of templating engines. EJS, Pug, Handlebars, Mustache, Nunjucks, Marco, Liquid. Liquid is more of like the Shopify templating engine. And then every language has their own. So like Ruby has like embedded Ruby. In Go, there is Plush. In PHP itself, the actual PHP language was started out as a templating language and now actually has templating languages built into it like Blade. So there's a lot of these, but they all do fundamentally the same thing. So I'm going to create a new folder for a new project. So we'll just call this EJS 0 to Hero. Okay, and then inside I'm going to open up this folder in the terminal. I'm going to create a new Npm project, npm init-y. Okay, and then I'm just going to install what we're going to need. We're going to need Express, npm install, Express, and EJS. That's all we need right now. Okay, so again, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a server.js. It's just a file. I'm going to bring in my only thing I need to import is Express. So const express equals require. So again, the require function is just the way we import things into a JavaScript file when we're using Node.js. So I'm importing Express. And then what I have to do is with Express, after you import Express, you have to create an application object. So I'm going to create an application object. And so we'll do const app equals express. That creates the application object. And essentially this app object is our application. And eventually our server will listen for requests. We always put this at the bottom. App.listen. And it'll listen on whatever port we specify. So we'll say port 3000. Okay, and then we can pass in a callback. Usually we just use this to send a message so that we know that the server started. So listening on port 3000. So before we go any further, let's just test that out. But that's basically your simplest, most basic Express application, these 3 lines. Okay, npm run. Well, actually, I didn't make any scripts, so we'll just do node server.js. It's listening on port 3000. So that means I can go to localhost, which is my computer, because I have the server running on my computer, and it's running on port 3000. And right now it cannot get, because I haven't made... It heard the request, I just haven't programmed any directions on how to handle requests into my Express app, so it doesn't know what to do with that. That's fine. Okay, it works. That's what matters. Okay, so now we're going to set the view engine. Now, the view engine for any framework is basically the engine that it uses to render templates. Okay, so basically, we're going to create a folder called views, because in Express, by default, it's going to use MVC. Most all these frameworks always use MVC architecture as a default, which means it's going to expect that any templates are going to be inside of a folder called views, except I made not a folder, I made a file, so let me delete that. Okay. It's going to be a folder called views. Okay, cool. And then I can put all my templates in there. But Express doesn't know what template engine I want to use. I can use any engine I want. I can use, again, Handlebars, Nunjucks, Mustache, pug, EJS, etc., etc., etc. There's a bunch of them. Okay, so that's what this app.set command does. There are certain things that are sort of like main, sort of like plug and play pieces of Express that you can change. One of them is the view engine, the thing that it uses to render. So I can say, hey, my view engine today is going to be EJS. Okay, and basically what it'll do is it'll go inside when I use the render function that's built into Express. It knows it's going to double check to see if I installed something called EJS. It'll see it in my node. So you see I installed something called EJS earlier. It's going to use that whenever I use the render function. So now if I create a route, let's see here, app.get, this means a get request to /, which is the main page. So if I make a get request to / /rec_res, okay, now what I can do is that again in Express, this represents the request and this represents the response. I'm just going to send a response. So the response I'm going to send is going to be using the render function, which means I want to render a template. So we're going to say that I'm going to create a template called home. Now, where does it look for this home file? By default, it's going to look in the views folder. That's where it's going to look for it. And that's it. That's my response. So I'm going to restart my server, node server.js, and now watch what happens when I go to this page. I get a new error, failed to look up view home. So it did look for the view. It looked for that template, but see, it couldn't find it because I haven't created a file called home in my views. And specifically, it's looking for a file that matches the view engine, EJS. So it's looking for home.ejs. So now it's looking for this file, and here I can just write normal HTML. Okay, so I can just create some HTML, put an H1, says hello world. Okay, cool. Now let me rerun my server. And now, if I refresh the page, I get hello world. That's exciting. Now, what's the point of EJS if this is just an HTML file? If this is just HTML, it'll just work like a normal HTML file. The reason you want to use EJS is because you can actually, it's called embedded JavaScript, EJS, embedded JavaScript. And literally what it lets you do is embed JavaScript. So what I could do is do something like this. Anytime I use these flounder hats like this, basically I can write JavaScript. So I could do something like this. In these, I could say if true, which is always true. Okay, so that's the beginning of my if statement. Then I need to go back in the JavaScript again. So here I'll close my if statement. I can say if true, say h1, it's true. Okay. Then let's include an else. So I'll just write out the else. Else. And then again, I gotta put the closing bracket in its own thing. The reason being is you have to kind of go in and out of HTML mode. So I have to write HTML outside of these brackets. Anytime I'm inside of this, it's JavaScript. So I gotta jump in and out of JavaScript. Okay. So, or else, h1, it's false. Okay. So essentially this is just an if statement. So if true, which is always going to be true, do this, and if else, do that. So only one of these two should show up because only the if or the else statement will run, because that's just how JavaScript works. So I run this, it's true. Now if I change this to false, well, technically then this should not run. It should say it's false. So let's try that out. Okay, it's false. So that's essentially what it's doing. It's what happens is that when we run that render function, it looks at this file. EJS looks for any time I use these little brackets, and it's saying, hey, there's some JavaScript here. Let me evaluate all this JavaScript first. It evaluates it and then outputs the finished HTML based on the result after it evaluates the JavaScript. So in this case, it's saying, hey, if this thing is true, do this, h1 true. If it's not true, then do this, it's false. Okay, it's just evaluating JavaScript. And again, you can do anything you can do in JavaScript, you can do in EJS. It's just, you're just using JavaScript. That's the beauty of it. Other templating languages generally have like their own syntax, so you have to kind of learn another mini language. The beauty of EJS, and most languages have a templating language like this where you use like that language in your templates, you just get to use what you already know, which is pretty cool. So I could do something like this. I can say while, you know, or I do like just a for loop. So we'll just say for, and we'll just say for num of, and since I haven't sent any variables here yet, because we haven't talked about that yet, I'll just write an array. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to loop over this array here. Okay. So let me put a closing bracket up here. Okay, I can then just be like h1, and see I have this variable now because it's just like a normal for of loop. So I get a variable for each item in the array. So I can just be like for num, and then when I refresh this, num. Oh, I know why. Because technically, for me to use the variable, I still need to kind of get out of JavaScript mode. But since I'm injecting something that should show up, I have to add a little extra. So what this does, it takes the result of the JavaScript between the brackets and actually injects it into the HTML. So that way it shows up as text. So I'm saying, hey, take this num variable and inject it as text. So now if I refresh this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because the JavaScript is saying loop over this array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and store each loop in num. And then I'm just taking advantage of that loop and defining that. Cool. The thing is that that'd be annoying if I have to define all my data inside here like that. So what you can do is you can actually send data down when you use this res.render function. So as a second argument to res.render, you can pass an object. And this object, you can put in any data that you want. So we'll just say, hey, we have a title. And we'll call the title cheese. So the keys in the object represent the values or the way I can access them in the template. So now I can say, you know, h2, and then here I can then do my percentage equal sign thing and grab the cheese variable. The question is, did I use that in uppercase for that? No, and it's not called cheese, it's called title. So I gotta use I have to use the key, not the value. So what's going to happen is that when I write title here, it's going to look inside the object that I sent to see if there's a property called title, which there is. And whatever so once it finds that key, it'll use whatever I passed in as the value of that key. So now I should see like 1 cheese, 2 cheese, 3 cheese, 4 cheese. Title is not defined. Oh, I have to restart the server. Okay. If I refresh, 1 cheese, 2 cheese, 3 cheese, 4 cheese, 5 cheese. Okay, and that's kind of cool. So point is, I can send data and I can use it in my template to dynamically generate my HTML file, which is really cool because then you can create HTML files that are dynamic. I can use like if statements that, you know, like for all sorts of different reasons. So for example, we'll just say, hey, we'll just use another if statement. So we'll say percentage if, and then we'll have a variable called the, why not? And if the is true, we'll have one thing versus another. So we'll just create this whole if else thing again. And just make sure that I put on my squiggly hats. Actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take advantage of VS Code, hold Alt, so that way I can just do it this way. There we go. And then at the end, actually just do this, Alt, and then do this. Okay, that's saves me a little time. Okay, and that can be like H1, style, well, I'll just say H1, hello, h1 goodbye. Goodbye, and let's see here. If I make a title here, title the true, and then we're gonna hit restart the server, hit refresh, and there we go. So you get the idea, but that's like the basics of how EJS works. The only other thing I want to point out is there's something called a partial, where you can actually inject another EJS file. So I could do something like this, create other.ejs, just put like an h1 hello world, and then I can inject that in here like this. So I'll just be like percentage, actually I'll just delete all this real quick, generate a file like this, percentage minus, you're gonna use a minus for this, use this include function, then we just say the name of the file, other, because again it assumes that you're gonna look inside the views folder, so it'd be other, and then we do this, and then I can literally just plop this out multiple times, and it's kind of like if I wrote that h1 hello world multiple times. So if I go over here and say like hello world, and that's called a EJS partial. But I'll leave it at that. Have a great day. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.